Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned. Because it's the Robert E. Howard Show. It's the Robert E. Howard Show once again, where Roger and I are celebrating Robert E. Howard's 120th birthday. He's 120 years old today, Roger. Congratulations, Robert E. Howard, on your 120th birthday. Robert E. Howard, my favorite writer of all time. I love Robert E. Howard, and he is, of course, the greatest pulp writer who ever lived, undisputably, the greatest pulp writer who ever lived. And I've been a big fan of Robert E. Howard since I was very young. Of course, I discovered Robert E. Howard, as viewers of this program might know, through the Conan the Barbarian comic book. I was a big fan of the Conan the Barbarian comic book when I was a kid. And of course, back then, I didn't realize that Conan was a character created by Robert E. Howard back in the 1930s. I thought he was just a comic book character, and an awesome one. But I learned about Robert E. Howard, and I started to read about Robert E. Howard mostly in the pages of old Savage Sword of Conan magazines. And these were magazines I was picking up used. They were old already at the time I was reading them in the 1980s. And in the 1970s, they very often had articles about Robert E. Howard and his other works. And that's how I learned about Robert E. Howard initially. The first Robert E. Howard book I ever read was Almuric, his interplanetary adventure. And I found a copy of that in a used bookstore. It was an old Ace copy of Almuric, which I wish I still had, but I don't think I have that particular copy anymore. But I picked it up because it had on the cover or on the back or somewhere from the author of Conan or from the creator of Conan. And I said, oh man, I got to read this. And I read it and I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. And I was hooked from that moment on. And I would hunt through all of the used bookstores in the Bay Area for Robert E. Howard books, and I found quite a few. Robert E. Howard, of course, great pulp writer of the 1920s and the 1930s, created so many great characters. Conan the Barbarian is the most popular, but of course there's also Solomon Kane, King Kull, so many others. And what's good to see is that there seems to be a renewed interest in Robert E. Howard nowadays. If you watch BookTube at all, you'll notice a lot of people talking about Robert E. Howard and his characters. A lot more than just a few years ago. Just 5 or 6 years ago, it feels like you didn't see quite as much interest in Robert E. Howard as you see now. And so that's nice. A lot of people are discovering this writer, this great writer, for the first time nowadays. And one of the reasons for that is that so much of his stuff is available now, where for a long time it wasn't really the case. You know, Robert E. Howard, when he passed away, he had no idea that any of his work would outlive him, really. But it did, and the Conan stories were published in the 50s in hardcover, in the 60s, and there was a big sword and sorcery boom in the 1970s. Of course, Robert E. Howard is the father of sword and sorcery. Whether he actually created the genre is in debate, but he was certainly the master of sword and sorcery, and he developed it and made it what it is today. And many people still consider the Shadow Kingdom, the King Kull story, to be the first real sword and sorcery story. And I think possibly, maybe. Fantastic story, that's for sure. But in the 1970s, there was a pretty big sword and sorcery boom. And so a lot of Robert E. Howard was published in paperback. And that went on into the early 1980s. But by the late 1980s, you saw less and less of it. For one thing, the Conan paperbacks that were edited and added to by L. Sprague Camp were out of print, I think, by the end of the 1980s and going into the 1990s. Tor Books were doing a whole series of pastiche Conan novels, but Robert E. Howard was never mentioned on the covers or in the interiors of those very often. Um, and so Robert E. Howard's original Conan stories were kind of starting to disappear. And a lot of Robert E. Howard's other work had gone out of print as well. Um, Baen Books came out with a fantastic series of mass market paperbacks, which reprinted all of the non Conan series and a lot of his horror stories and things like that. So that was a great series that kind of kept uh, Robert E. Howard alive during that time, kept his work alive anyway. And then going into the 2000s, we got this series, this book, which reprints a book that was published by Wandering Star, was published in 2003, I want to say. Yeah, 2003. So this is over 20 years old, which is just mind-boggling because I still feel like this is a new set of books. I'm just old. But the Del Rey series of Robert E. Howard books started to be published in 2003, and Del Rey has published all of Robert E. Howard's major work, all the Conan stuff in 3 volumes, King Kull, Bran Mak Morn, Solomon Kane, a great volume of his horror stories. So these Del Rey volumes have been available for over 20 years. You can still get them. They're still in print, which is just kind of an amazing thing. And it proves how interested readers are in Robert E. Howard's work. And so this has been great. I mean, you have a whole generation of people who have read Conan for the first time in Del Rey volumes. And this is just such a great set. No pastiche fiction, no nonsense. This is all the real deal. So that's great. And recently, the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press has been putting out these great paperbacks of everything else that Robert E. Howard wrote that isn't available in the Del Rey set of books. And that's a lot. That's a lot. And the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press has been doing a great job with these volumes. The Robert E. Howard Foundation Press, which has its own YouTube channel, and they're putting out a special video today, Roger, which I will link down below. They're putting out a great video today, which has a bunch of different writers and scholars and booktubers reading selections of Robert E. Howard's work. I actually am in that video. I'm reading a poem, and I don't do too badly until the end. I really fall on my face at the end of that. I'm not a very good poetry reader, I discovered, Roger. Imagine that. I should have let Roger do it. But there are a lot of great booktubers and scholars and a bunch of different people in that video, and it's awesome. So I will link that down below. It's certainly a cause to celebrate Robert E. Howard's 120th birthday, because Robert E. Howard is gaining a lot of recognition, a lot of popularity. Even to this day, he hasn't quite reached the seriousness critically that I think he should. You still don't have and if you consider Robert E. Howard's influence, I've made this argument before. If you consider his influence, I believe he should have like a Library of America volume, at least one, maybe a couple. Penguin should have Black Spine Classics of Robert E. Howard books. I still think he should have that critical recognition and some more scholarly volumes reprinting his work. But that's okay. That's okay. He's doing all right, Robert E. Howard, nowadays, because all of his stuff, or at least most of his stuff that he wrote, is available. And the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press is still putting out books. We have volumes of his boxing stories that are yet to come. And Breckenridge Elkins, that should be coming up soon from the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press. So, if you have an interest in Robert E. Howard, what a great time it is to be a Robert E. Howard fan. It was more difficult when I was younger. Everything wasn't available, and you had to really hunt for some of those paperbacks that reprinted his work. Now you can order pretty much everything you need to have a full Robert E. Howard library, or at least close to it. So a great time to be a Robert E. Howard fan, and I am so happy to see so many people celebrating the birthday of Robert E. Howard, and I hope his popularity increases and people continue to read Robert E. Howard, because he's fantastic. And I guess that's all I have to say. Roger, happy birthday, Robert E. Howard. I will catch you next time.